After divorce, my husband flaunted his secretary at Malibu Beach. But he didn't know his father's fortune was the very thing that would ruin him. Stay with me as I take you through my story. If it speaks to you, I'd love if you could support our channel by subscribing, dropping a like, and sharing it with the ones close to you. My name is Ayanna Price. I'm in my early 30s now, and if you ask anyone who truly knows me, they'll tell you I've always been hardworking, the kind of woman who doesn't quit no matter how heavy life gets. I was raised in Atlanta, in a family where nothing was handed to us easily, so I grew up valuing effort, respect, and loyalty. Years later, I moved to Los Angeles, chasing both career opportunities and a fresh start. That's where my story crossed paths with Derek Caldwell. Derek was everything people dream about on the surface: tall, smooth-talking, with a smile that could melt walls. More than that, he was the son of Leonard Caldwell, a powerful businessman who practically owned half of Malibu. To the outside world, Derek looked like the golden boy who had it all. To me, in those first days, he seemed like the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I had said. When Derek asked me to marry him, I thought I had finally stepped into a life where love and security walked hand in hand. Our wedding was lavish, the kind people post about for weeks, and for a while, our marriage looked picture perfect. We lived in a beautiful home by the coast, went on expensive vacations, and attended parties where everyone wanted to shake Derek's hand and compliment me on being the lucky one. But behind all the sparkle, I began to notice shadows creeping in. At first, it was little things. Derek stayed late at work, his phone glued to his hand, screen tilted away from me when messages buzzed. He grew distant, offering me gifts as if they could replace real time together. I told myself he was just stressed, maybe overwhelmed by the weight of his father's name. But deep down, a part of me already knew something wasn't right. The truth came crashing down one night when excuses no longer made sense. I followed my gut and discovered what I had feared. Derek was having an affair. And not just with anyone, but with his secretary, Madison Greer. She was younger, eager, always hanging around him at events with that smile I once thought was mine alone. When I confronted him, Derek didn't even bother denying it. Instead, he told me I was overreacting, that I should be grateful for the lifestyle he provided, as if love could be measured in dollar signs. In that moment, something inside me broke, not in weakness, but in clarity. I realized the man I married never truly valued me. And that was the beginning of the end. It was a late Friday evening when my suspicion finally turned into proof. Derek had told me he was stuck in meetings downtown, the same excuse I had heard too many times before. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right, so instead of going home, I drove straight to the hotel where I knew he often met clients. My heart pounded as I walked through the lobby, every step heavy with dread, but also a strange sense of certainty. When I pushed open the door to the suite, the world I had been clinging to shattered in one brutal instant. There they were, Derek and Madison, entangled on the bed like I had never existed. Madison didn't even look ashamed. She smiled, smug and careless, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Derek, on the other hand, jumped up, annoyed more than guilty, like I had interrupted his plans instead of caught him betraying our vows. I thought I would explode with rage, scream until the walls shook, but what came over me was something colder. A sharp, clear calm that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just one mistake, some slip he would regret. This was who Derek really was, a man who never valued me, who thought his wealth and charm made him untouchable. He pulled on his shirt and sneered at me. "Ayanna, you're overreacting. This is nothing. You should be grateful for the life you have. Most women would kill to live the way you do." His words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even trying to fight for me. He saw me as a piece of furniture in his perfect picture, replaceable and easy to dismiss. Madison laughed softly at his side, like I was some joke they both shared. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't beg. I simply turned and walked out of that hotel, each step echoing with the decision I had just made. By the time I reached my car, the choice was clear. I was done with Derek Caldwell. The divorce papers were filed within weeks. He tried to play his games in court, flaunting his father's money and acting as though I should crawl back just to keep the lifestyle. But I refused to bend. I walked away with my dignity intact, not looking for his pity or his riches. Derek smirked at me during our last meeting, leaning back in his chair as if he had already moved on. "Don't worry," he said, arrogance dripping from every word. "I'll replace you in a week. Someone younger, someone who knows how to keep me happy." I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. Because deep down, I knew something Derek couldn't see yet, that his careless pride was going to be the very thing that destroyed him. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. Months had passed since the divorce, and I was still learning how to breathe on my own again. Life felt quieter, lonelier at times, but there was a strength in me that hadn't existed before. One afternoon, I got an invitation from a mutual friend to a birthday party at Malibu Beach. At first, I hesitated. The thought of running into Derek made my stomach twist, but part of me didn't want to hide forever. I told myself it was just a party, just a chance to enjoy the ocean and maybe feel normal again. When I arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the water with streaks of gold and pink. People were laughing, music floated through the air, and for a moment, I almost let myself relax. But then I saw him. Derek, standing tall in his designer shirt, with Madison draped over his arm like she had won some grand prize. My chest tightened, and I froze, but I forced myself not to turn back. They saw me too. Derek's eyes lit with the cruel kind of amusement I remembered all too well. Madison leaned into him, whispering something before throwing her head back in laughter. Together, they walked through the crowd, making sure everyone noticed them. I tried to keep my focus on conversations with old friends, but it was impossible to ignore the way Derek paraded Madison around, introducing her like a trophy. He acted as if I didn't exist, like I was invisible. It stung, but what came next cut deeper. At one point, Madison walked by me with a smirk, her voice loud enough for others nearby to hear. "So this is the famous Ayanna," she said mockingly. "The practice wife." Laughter from a few shallow onlookers bubbled up, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The words landed like a slap across my face, cruel and deliberate. I clenched my fists but said nothing. I had already given too much of my energy to Derek's lies and disrespect. I wasn't about to hand Madison the satisfaction of a scene. Derek slipped his arm around her waist, grinning as though her insult was some private joke between them. He looked at me once, briefly, like a man who thought he had won, who believed I was broken and beneath him now. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I stayed a little while longer, quietly finishing my drink, pretending not to notice the stares or whispers. Then, when the music grew louder and the air heavier, I slipped away from the beach without saying goodbye. As I walked toward my car, the ocean breeze cooled the sting on my face, and a single thought grew firm in my mind. I would never allow myself to be humiliated again. If Derek thought this was victory, he was wrong. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the start of something he couldn't yet imagine. It was over coffee with an old acquaintance that I learned the truth, a truth that would shift everything I thought I knew about the Caldwell family. My friend leaned in close, lowering her voice as if the walls might be listening. She told me that Leonard Caldwell, Derek's father, wasn't just wealthy. He was ruthless, a man who ran his empire with rules carved in stone. His money was a fortress, and entry was not guaranteed, not even for his own children. According to her, Leonard had a list of conditions tied to the family trust. Derek's behavior, his choices, even the woman he married, everything mattered. And Madison Greer, the secretary Derek thought was his golden ticket to happiness, was in fact the very thing that could strip him of everything he counted on. Leonard despised her. He had made it clear that if Derek chose Madison, he'd be cut off without hesitation. I sat back in my chair, the words sinking in. Suddenly, memories surfaced, moments I hadn't thought about in months. I remembered the way Leonard used to look at me at family gatherings, his sharp eyes measuring, but never unkind. He once pulled me aside during a gala, his voice low but direct. "You're the only woman who makes my son look respectable," he had said. At the time, I thought it was a backhanded compliment. Now I realized it had been more of a warning, a glimpse into how much weight my presence carried in Derek's standing with his father. The irony burned. Derek had thrown me aside for Madison, paraded her around as if she were his crown jewel. Yet all along, she was his undoing. He thought he had traded up, but in truth, he had gambled away the very security he clung to. As I walked home that evening, the ocean breeze against my skin, my mind began to stir with thoughts I hadn't allowed myself before. Up until then, I had chosen dignity, walking away quietly while Derek mocked me. But now, I couldn't help but see the possibility laid out in front of me. I didn't need to lift a sword or scream in his face. His own choices were weapons enough. I imagined Leonard watching his son squander everything for a woman he couldn't respect. I imagined Derek, arrogant and blind, thinking his father would always be there to catch him. And I imagined myself, standing on the other side, untouched, free, while the empire Derek had taken for granted slipped right through his fingers. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing Leonard's voice in my head, that sharp, almost grudging respect when he spoke to me. The seed was planted then, small but steady. For the first time since the divorce, I felt not just pain or anger, but something sharper, resolve. Derek thought he had humiliated me. He had no idea that the game was only just beginning. Derek had always walked through life with the confidence of someone who believed the world would bend for him. After the divorce, that confidence only grew louder. He strutted around Malibu with Madison on his arm, acting as though nothing and no one could touch him. To him, Leonard Caldwell's fortune wasn't a question. It was a guarantee. Derek assumed that no matter what mistakes he made, the family money would cushion his fall. He lived like the crown prince of an empire. Every week seemed to bring a new luxury purchase. A sleek sports car delivered to the driveway, designer clothes spilling out of shopping bags, diamond jewelry he draped around Madison like she was a queen. Their vacations became the talk of his circle. One weekend it was Bora Bora, the next a private villa in Italy, all captured in glossy photos Madison made sure to share with anyone who'd listen. Parties became their playground. Derek threw lavish gatherings at Malibu mansions, complete with champagne towers, live bands, and guest lists packed with people who cared more about free drinks than genuine friendship. He smiled through it all, bragging about investments he hadn't actually made and deals he pretended to understand. To the outside world, he looked untouchable. But behind closed doors, the cracks were starting to show. Leonard had grown tired of his son's arrogance, tired of funding a lifestyle that had no purpose. Quietly, without announcement, he began shutting doors. Accounts Derek once had easy access to were suddenly harder to reach. Credit cards were capped. Promises of future payouts turned into silence. Leonard didn't cut him off all at once. He let the rope slip slowly, watching how long it would take for Derek to notice. And notice he did. Bills began piling up, though Derek brushed them aside at first, convinced it was some banking error. He told Madison not to worry, that everything would sort itself out, but the edge in his voice grew sharper each time another statement arrived. Still, he kept spending, desperate to keep up the image of power and control. As for me, I didn't interfere. I heard things through friends, little whispers about Derek's growing debts, the late payments, the nervous calls he made to people he once dismissed. I could have stepped in, I could have spread the truth faster, but I chose silence. It was better to let him spin his own web, to let his pride drag him further down. There was a strange satisfaction in watching from the sidelines. Not out of cruelty, but from knowing I no longer carried the burden of his choices. Derek thought he had everything figured out. He thought Leonard's fortune was his birthright. But I knew better. And deep inside, I sensed the fall was coming sooner than he could ever imagine. The night of the charity event was warm. The kind where the ocean air carried just enough salt to remind you of Malibu's wealth. I hadn't planned on seeing anyone from my past there, but fate has its own sense of humor. As I moved through the ballroom, dressed in a simple black gown, I felt a familiar pair of eyes on me. When I turned, I found Leonard Caldwell standing by the bar, his presence commanding the room without effort. For a moment, I considered slipping away. The last thing I wanted was a conversation with the man whose son had betrayed me so cruelly. But Leonard's gaze didn't carry judgment. Instead, he gave me a slight nod, the kind that felt less like an invitation and more like an order. I walked over, steady on the outside though my stomach twisted inside. "Ms. Price," he greeted, his deep voice calm, almost warm. "It's been too long." I smiled politely, careful not to reveal too much. "It has. I didn't expect to see you here tonight." He studied me for a moment, then sighed, the weight of a disappointed father settling across his face. "I owe you something," he said. "An apology. Not for what you endured directly, but for the kind of son I raised." His words startled me. Leonard Caldwell was not known for softness. He built empires with iron hands and sharp decisions. To hear regret from him felt almost unreal. "Derek is reckless," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "And I know that recklessness cost you more than anyone should have to pay." I didn't reply immediately. Part of me wanted to tell him that Derek had humiliated me, paraded Madison in front of me like I was nothing. But another part of me wanted to keep my dignity intact, just as I had through the divorce. So I only nodded. "We all make our choices." Leonard's eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. "And choices," he said slowly, "come with consequences." My son seems to have forgotten that. But I have not. The way he said it sent a ripple through me. It wasn't just a father's disappointment. It was a warning, maybe even a promise. For the first time, I saw clearly that Derek's life of luxury was built on fragile ground, and Leonard was more than willing to let it collapse. Despite everything, Leonard added, softening slightly, I want you to know that I still hold respect for you. You were the only woman who ever steadied Derek, even if he was too blind to see it. I thanked him quietly, but inside, something darker stirred. Respect from Leonard was valuable, but it was his words about consequences that stayed with me. Derek's downfall wasn't just possible, it was certain. And as I left the event that night, heels clicking against marble floors, I made a silent vow. If Derek was destined to fall, I wouldn't stop it. In fact, I'd make sure he felt every inch of the drop. I didn't need to shout or throw stones to make my point. Silence and patience could be sharper weapons than rage. So, I started small. Malibu was a world built on whispers, and I learned quickly that the right words, dropped in the right ears, could spread faster than fire. When I attended gatherings, I didn't mention Derek outright. Instead, I laughed lightly in conversations, slipping in small observations as if they were harmless remarks. Madison's still so young, I'd say casually, swirling the drink in my hand. I'm sure she means well, though she doesn't always know how to carry herself at these events. The words were soft, almost kind, but the looks exchanged between people told me they heard the sting underneath. At another dinner, I commented quietly to someone close to Derek's business circle. Derek's been throwing parties every week, hasn't he? It must be exhausting to keep up. I just hope he's not stretching himself too thin. I let the concern linger on my face, as though I cared for his well-being, when in truth I was placing seeds of doubt that others would water. And they did. Within weeks, little rumors began to ripple. People whispered about Derek's reckless spending, about Madison's immaturity, about the possibility that he wasn't as secure as he pretended. The men who once clinked glasses with him at every party started excusing themselves, cutting meetings short, distancing themselves from the glow that was beginning to flicker. I heard stories trickle back to me, clients questioning his reliability, business partners avoiding his calls. For a man like Derek, whose whole image rested on being untouchable, those subtle shifts were deadly. He didn't even realize yet that the ground beneath him was weakening. Madison, on the other hand, began to feel it. The sparkle in her eyes dulled when she realized the compliments weren't coming as often. People didn't rush to greet her the way they once did. She noticed the sideways glances when Derek made another loud boast about his supposed investments. And at home, I imagined the questions started. Questions about money, about stability, about whether the life she'd attached herself to was really as golden as it seemed. I never pushed too hard, never revealed my hand. That was the beauty of it. The rumors didn't sound like rumors at all. They sounded like observations people came to on their own. I didn't need to tarnish Derek's image with outright lies. The truth, wrapped in a little doubt, was enough to corrode his shine. Every step was deliberate, every word measured. And though I smiled and acted like I had long moved on, inside I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't destroying Derek directly. I was letting his own arrogance unravel him, one quiet thread at a time. And Madison, once so smug in her victory, was beginning to see that the glamour she clung to might not last forever. The news came quietly, almost like a whisper through Malibu's polished halls. Leonard Caldwell had cut Derek off. No warnings, no second chances. Just a firm decision that Derek was no longer part of the trust. For a man who had built his life on the assumption that money would always be there, it was a blow he never saw coming. At first, Derek tried to hide it. He kept throwing parties, kept flashing smiles, but the cracks were too wide to cover. Creditors started calling, bills piled up, and the luxury cars he had paraded around suddenly disappeared from his driveway. He blamed the banks, blamed delays, blamed anything but himself. The truth, though, was clear. The fountain had run dry, and he didn't know how to live without it. Madison felt it immediately. The designer gifts stopped arriving, the trips were canceled, and the sparkle of their life dimmed faster than she could stand. She began snapping at Derek in public, rolling her eyes when he promised things he couldn't deliver. "You're broke," she hissed at him one evening in front of a group of friends. "What good are you to me now?" The humiliation clung to him like a second skin. Derek, desperate to salvage some shred of control, began circling back to me. He called late at night, his voice shaky, filled with a desperation I had never heard before. "Ayanna," he said, "I made a mistake. You were the real thing. Madison was just a distraction. I see that now. I listened, letting him pour out his words, the arrogance gone, replaced with begging. For a moment, I thought about the man he had once pretended to be, the man I thought I had married. But then I remembered the hotel room, the laughter at Malibu Beach, the way he had told me I was replaceable in a week. When he finally paused, waiting for me to save him, I couldn't hold back the laugh that rose in my chest. It wasn't cruel. It was the kind of laugh that comes when life finally makes sense. "Derek," I said, steady and calm, "you chose this path. You paraded her in front of me, and you threw away everything for it. Now you're reaping what you planted." He tried again, stammering promises about change, about starting fresh. But I had no intention of stepping back into the fire I had already escaped. I ended the call with a simple truth. "I'm not your mistake, Derek. I'm the lesson you never learned." After that night, I didn't hear much from him directly. Word spread quickly, though. How he was drowning in debt, how Madison's patience was running thin, how the man who once strutted through Malibu like a king was now nothing more than a shadow of himself. And for me, there was no gloating, no need to shout my victory. Watching him collapse under the weight of his own arrogance was enough. He had written his downfall long before I ever thought about revenge. It happened just when Derek thought things couldn't possibly get worse. Rumors had been floating for weeks, whispers that Madison was restless, that she had grown tired of living without the sparkle she once bragged about. I didn't pay them much mind at first, but Malibu has a way of letting secrets slip into the open. The truth arrived at yet another one of those coastal gatherings, the kind Derek used to rule. He showed up looking thinner, his clothes not quite as sharp, his confidence fraying at the edges. Madison was on his arm, but something about her posture was different, less loyal, more calculating. People noticed. They always did. It was in the middle of the evening, while laughter and music filled the air, that the betrayal unfolded. Madison, bold as ever, slipped away from Derek's side and cozied up to one of his old friends, a man who had once toasted Derek's so-called success. They were too close, whispering, touching, not caring who saw. And soon enough, everyone did. By the time Derek realized, it was too late. Whispers turned into open stares, and then into laughter muffled behind champagne glasses. He stormed across the patio, face red with humiliation, but Madison didn't even flinch. She smiled, brushing him off as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. "I can't do this anymore," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the crowd. "I'm not staying with a man who can't even take care of himself." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. And just like that, she walked away with his former friend, leaving Derek standing in the middle of the party, stripped of pride, stripped of power. The silence that followed was crueler than any insult. People who had once fought to be in his orbit turned their backs, shaking their heads or chuckling quietly at his downfall. The same mouths that once praised him now ridiculed him openly. To them, he wasn't the golden son of Leonard Caldwell anymore. He was a cautionary tale. I wasn't there that night, but the stories reached me within hours. Malibu loved nothing more than a scandal, and Derek's humiliation spread like wildfire. The man who had once flaunted Madison in front of me, who had laughed at my pain, was now the butt of every joke. He was broke, abandoned, and mocked by the same people he thought were his loyal admirers. I pictured him standing there, trying to hold his head high while everything around him crumbled. And though I didn't celebrate out loud, deep inside I felt the balance shift. The universe had a way of delivering justice, and in Derek's case, it came wearing the same smile he had once thought would secure his happiness. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. He had lost everything he paraded against me, and the world finally saw him for who he really was. Freedom came slowly at first, like learning to walk after carrying weight for too long. I poured my energy into myself, into the dreams I had put on hold while I was busy being Derek Caldwell's wife. I opened a small consulting business, something I had always wanted to do, but never felt supported enough to pursue. Day by day, it grew. Clients came, opportunities followed, and before long, I was building something solid, something that belonged only to me. The best part wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the peace. I woke up each morning knowing my life was mine, not dependent on anyone else's name, not shadowed by someone else's choices. Independence had a sweetness that no luxury car or mansion could ever match. Of course, Derek's ruin was no secret. Word traveled quickly, especially in Malibu, where gossip carried faster than the tides. People whispered about his debts, about Madison's betrayal, about how the once arrogant golden boy had become a man no one wanted to be seen with. I didn't have to say a word. His downfall spoke louder than anything I could have done. What surprised me most was how people's eyes shifted when they looked at me. The same faces that once pitted me, that had whispered behind my back at parties when Derek flaunted Madison, now regarded me with respect. They called me resilient, strong, dignified. They marveled at how I hadn't lashed out or sunk into bitterness. They didn't know that my silence had always been my weapon. One evening, months later, I found myself back at Malibu Beach, the same place where I had once walked away humiliated. This time, I wasn't there for a party or anyone's approval. I went alone, barefoot in the sand, letting the waves wash over my feet. The sky stretched wide, painted in soft shades of dusk, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely unbothered. I stood there, remembering it all. The betrayal, the laughter, the nights I doubted myself. And then I thought of Derek, undone not by me, but by his own pride. He had chosen arrogance, chosen to humiliate me, chosen to believe he was untouchable. And in the end, those choices were the very things that destroyed him. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need revenge written in fire. My satisfaction came in knowing that I had survived, that I had rebuilt, that I had risen without him. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was his own lesson, written in the ruins of everything he once held dear. As the waves rolled in and the evening breeze brushed against my skin, I breathed deeply and smiled. Quiet, steady content. My story didn't end with anger. It ended with peace. And in that peace, I found the sweetest revenge of all, living well, untouched, and completely free. Do you believe Ayanna was right to move on and build her own peace? Or should she have given Derek another chance after everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.